Hi. So, if you notice anything going on with my voice, just be warned. I'm recovering from getting pretty sick over the last week. Tonight, though, what God gave me to talk about was His timing. And this is one of those topics that everybody needs to understand, and yet so few do. I mean, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, when I think back to what I've heard said about it over the years and years and years, also just for anybody wondering, I had to reposition the room because we had a dice supply come in, and now unfortunately we get Xanathar and his goldfish lurking over top of us. He's a D&D character. Such is the nature of setting this up in a game shop. I just don't have my old buddy, the Black Dragon, there looming over my shoulder. Schmash. Anyway, but I digress. Timing. God's timing it's a difficult thing to grasp and to understand. And the reality is that there's a lot of misinformation. And it comes from two places. Number one, it comes from misunderstanding. And number two, it comes from an accepted lack of understanding. What I mean by that is that there's a lot of religious people who would rather just shelve the whole concept of understanding God and His timing, and instead would choose to exist in a place of lack. And we'll delve into that a little bit further in just a moment, but just to kind of bring it forward here, and what we're talking about God's timing, and being in God's timing, and being on His time frame. And the reality is that this is going to be one of those things. I'm going to try to speed through it, but there's a lot. And so to kind of finish off, one thing that I started to say there was, when I look back on messages that I've heard about God's timing, they're kind of a series of different issues that crop up. Number one is the issue of this kind of mindset of accepting not knowing. Basically this very passive kind of message that says you just let God do whatever He's going to do, and you don't worry about it. Well, what if it's a time frame, though? What if there is a time frame? Right? There are plenty of occasions where you're being given a word, or you've heard something, or there's something coming up and you feel a pull to go do it, but there's a time frame on it. It only exists for a portion of time. You have to make a decision. You have to be a part of it or not be a part of it. And you want to know if God's actually calling you forward into it or not. And then what do you do? I mean, what do you do with that? If that's what you believe, then you're going to be stuck, aren't you? It's going to be like decision paralysis. Well, okay, another one that I've heard a lot is that you have to take time. One of the crucial kinds of issues that pops up in some groups is the idea of taking hold of time and becoming a master of time. And this is valid, but it doesn't apply here. What we're talking about it doesn't apply here directly, I'll put it that way. A lot of people, they want to accomplish the things that God has for them. But when we're talking about being in God's timing, we're talking about following Him. This isn't about taking the lead. This isn't about pushing through. This isn't about running forward and making things happen. This is about following God where He leads you. And the thing about it is that sometimes that's the way it is. And we'll delve into that a lot more deeply in a moment. But just to finish kind of like dispelling some of the routine things. So there's a lot of people who will take this whole concept of God's timing, and instead they turn it into a thing of like, you have to, okay, God has told you what he wants. Now you have to go do it. Well, if you're following God's directions, then sometimes his directions are going to be wait. Think about when Elijah ran in fear at the threat of Jezebel and ran off into the cave. God told him to wait. He had sent the angel to stand there and like feed him and keep him safe, and was just like, you need to rest before your journey. Sometimes that's what God tells us to do, and sometimes there is no time frame. It is just, you need to rest. I will tell you when you're ready to go. And in those instances, a lot of us don't like that. And like I said, we'll delve into that a little bit more in just a moment. But, as a result, a lot of us have these kinds of like type A, high-strung kind of mentalities where we're gonna make the will of God happen. And we're gonna force it. And that isn't good. That isn't in his timing. There are times where he might call you to something, and we'll kind of just like work within that. But there's a lot of times when if we're trying to stay within his timing, you can't be the one pushing. You have to follow. Another thing that I've heard is so aside from the passive one and the very active one, I've heard a lot of different ideas about like God's timing. One message that I've heard popped off about before is like the statement that a day to him is 1,000 years, or 1,000 years is but a day to God, and so on. And people use that to kind of like wash away any need to know or understand. But the thing about it is that you've got to understand that part of to kind of just like start getting into some of the meat of this. One of the most valuable things, why it's important to know God's timing and understand God's timing, is because it's part of knowing God. It's part of knowing God to do this. Like, it's part of knowing God to know his timing. And this is why it's important, because it's part of learning him. You guys, you gotta understand, like, just to kind of like, sorry, I'm just kind of like bursting. Last week was a week off, and then I was sick for several days, and I'm kind of like excited to just share stuff. You got to understand that part of this is knowing God. One of the big things with us as individuals, as followers of Jesus, as Christians, is that we develop a relationship with God. We develop a knowledge of who God is as we develop a relationship with him. Okay? So, and that is what grows us and builds us and moves us forward in this existence that is living in this world but not of this world. We're meant to be carrying the kingdom of God with us at all points in time. However, you cannot carry the kingdom of God if you don't know the king, if you don't know what the kingdom of God is. If you think that the kingdom of God is a church, it's not the church. If you think the kingdom of God is a fictional realm or is heaven, that's not it either. The kingdom of God is conceptually a whole thing built around what happens when you bring the Holy Spirit into this place. You are meant to be carrying heaven and crashing it into earth to bring it here on earth in time, shalom on this planet all around you. You cannot do that if you don't know what heaven is like. You cannot do that if you don't know who God is. You cannot do that if you don't know who you're meant to be in that kingdom. So there's a whole thing here where we're meant to be moving forward. We're meant to be bringing God's kingdom with us. We're meant to be showing the world Jesus. And we can't do that from this place of unknowing. So it's invaluable for us to get to know who God is because we're carrying his name. We're carrying the name of his son. We're carrying the very presence of him with us. Ideally, yeah. And as a result, that is what changes atmospheres. That is what changes environments. That is what changes the world. It's God's power. It's God's person coming and indwelling with us in this world and us being under him. There's an interesting little prophecy out of Isaiah. We'll delve more into the prophecies out of Isaiah in a bit, but it talks about how the government will rest on the shoulders of the Messiah. And it's an interesting statement because it highlights this point about the kingdom of God being carried on Jesus' shoulders. The government, and under his reign, we would know peace and all this like wondrous stuff. And the funny thing about it is for those who have lived in the kingdom and lived under Jesus' rule, you know what it's like. And for those of you who don't, that's okay. There's an invitation here for you to do the same. But the thing about it is that like in all of this, there is a timing thing. There's always timing. Because God does not move without order. God is not chaos. Nothing he does is chaotic, or it feels chaotic to us sometimes because we're kind of like, it's kind of like the whole thing where sometimes it's said that getting into ministry or following the Holy Spirit is going to be like jumping into a river and getting sent down the downstream. So you're going through the rapids and so on, and you're just trying to survive. But the thing about it is that you have to remember is that God is the river. God built it. He crafted it. He paved the way. He knows where you're going, and he knows what's safe, and he knows how to keep you safe. So there's a whole thing about timing and about this where it comes down to knowing and trusting God. And that I will come back to again and again because the reality is that is going to permeate every aspect of understanding timing as it is with him. Because that is our grand problem. The grand error in the children of God, in those who would claim his name, is not trusting him. We judge the world around us. We're confident when we have control, and that's what we yearn for. And the thing about it is that learning God's timing, learning how to follow God's timing, is giving up your own control. And the funny thing about it is like both sides of that coin, the really passive people and the really like aggressive, active people in terms of like those who try to claim knowledge and understanding of God's timing, the ones who just kind of dismiss it as we shouldn't even touch it. We shouldn't even try to understand that. They're just as culpable of trying to control things as the people who are actively trying to make God do things on their time. And I know that's like a funny thing, like a lot of people who might like believe that side would be like, I'm not trying to control God. No. You're trying to control your own emotional state around God. You're also trying to control the relationship with God that you have by not delving into that muddy ground. You're keeping it shallow. See, it's just as much an act of control to try to keep a relationship shallow as it is to try to push it forward, to try to make it happen. Because in the end, what you're doing is you're trying to control the amount of responsibility that you have for things. And there are plenty of words, there are plenty of timings, things where God says, do this thing, and he means now. And that's a whole thing. And before we delve into that, the control thing, just to kind of finish that out, we talk about this thing about like control and about the yearning for control that we have, and how that is a problem. Because a lot of times where we butt heads with God is because we want things on our timing. And sometimes that's a relevant issue, right? So, like, for example, like I was saying earlier, what happens when you have this situation where, like, you have that wishy-washy view of God's timing, but you need a decision made now. You got a missions trip coming up in like 2 months. You need $250,000 in order to go. That's more than most missions trips, but I know they're expensive. Anyway, you need like $250,000 to get there, and you feel like God told you and showed you. Well, what's his timing on this? Are you really supposed to go? Because it's looking like it's not going to happen. 2 months is not a lot of time, one would think, to generate $250,000. And even if it's $2,500, right? A lot of us might struggle with that too. But the thing about it is that you find yourself in this boat where you have to ask God, okay, well, you put me here. You put me on this path. Are you going to provide for me? And then you wait. Well, what if he did provide for you? What if he's given you favor? What if he's given you people? What if he's given you all kinds of things, right? And the reality of it is that that's a muddy ground, but we're going to kind of have to work with it here due to the fact that it all ties in. See, the biggest hurdle that we have to run into is that there is a place where we have to give up control of how we would do things. And the important thing about it is that, because see, we are very success mind oriented in terms of how things work. Like any creature, we're very focused on like the rewards of winning, So even most kids are given pieces of candy every time they get an answer right, or anytime they do something good, right? You get a treat for it. And as a result, a lot of us, collectively, human beings in general, especially Christians, we're very success-oriented in terms of what we view as being God's will. To kind of like make a more precise statement, we assume that if we are successful, then God was backing us. And we assume that if we failed, God was not backing us. And that's how we handle, that's the kind of blanket that we throw over the whole convention of following God. If God calls me to go on this mission trip, and I need to come up with this absurd amount of money, me getting that absurd amount of money shows that I'm meant to go on this missions trip. And it doesn't matter how I get that. And maybe you have the mindset of, okay, well, maybe if God provides the money, then I'm meant to go. Fair. But some people have the mentality that God wants me to go, so I need to get the money. So then they proceed to go around and raise the money. Maybe they do donations, maybe they take donations, maybe they do like a bake sale, maybe a garage sale, maybe they sell stuff, or maybe they do really dirty things like start manipulating people, working people over, using their understanding of the church and how people feel about missions to coerce people into giving up their money. But it's all for the right cause, right? See, the problem with that whole mentality of like the people who want to make the time happen, they want to make God's will happen, is they're all coming with that mindset that success equals God's will. And that is not how God works. I will tell you straight up that God is not always interested in you succeeding in what he calls you to do. God will call you to places knowing you're going to fail, so you fail. And I know that like a lot of people would argue with that and it's like, well, that doesn't seem very fair. And it's like, well, actually, yeah, it is. Because a lot of us need to be broken. Sometimes God doesn't give us timing because we're not ready. God's timing, how do I put this? He doesn't give us things what we want in time, in the time frame that we want them, because he doesn't want us to go do the thing, because we're not ready to do it. We presume that because we have the heart for it that we're ready to go do it. But to be blunt, there's plenty of people who they feel the drive to go be a teacher or a pastor or to go on missions or to evangelize the lost and the sick. And because they feel that pull and that drive, they feel like it's meant for them to go do this. And any opportunity that they have is something that God wants them to go and do. But the reality is that doesn't make you ready to go do it. As somebody with like 12 years of ministry experience at this point, I'm telling you, just because you have the heart for it doesn't mean you're ready to go do it. Not everybody who has a heart to teach is ready to go stand on a pulpit and preach to 100 plus people. You might not be ready to go sit in front of your Bible study and preach. Because the thing about it is maybe your heart's not in the right place. Maybe you have a heart for people to learn, but maybe that comes from your own perspective of yourself being so much more knowledgeable and so much better than them. Maybe pride is the thing that warms your heart and not the Holy Spirit. And that is stuff that God irons out. Because a lot of us, we have heart cries. You know, if you go back to our old series on the offices, there's 5 different offices. All have a specific cry of the heart that's meant to emulate God's person. Everybody has one. Everybody has one. And as a result, they have a certain thing that pushes them and makes them driven to serve God in this way. But it doesn't mean that they've got the keys to the kingdom. Just because you've got the heart of a fighter doesn't mean you have the skill of a fighter. Right? Like you have the will to be a soldier, but you don't know how to you don't know how to shoot. What are you going to do? I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to go out into a war zone and you're going to get murdered. That's what's going to happen. Because that's what happens all the time. And a lot of us don't listen. We don't think about that. We don't pay attention to it. We assume that because we have this desire, we're going to be successful. And then what's worse is when we are successful, when we're not ready. You know, and the thing about it is that we justify it at that point. Well, God blessed me to do this. No, sometimes you forced your way into it. Sometimes what you did was you forced your way into that role or that position. I know one guy in particular who comes to mind on a routine basis. He's a pastor of a church at this point. He wasn't ready to be a pastor. He wasn't ready to run the small group that we were part of. But he did go ahead and like weasel his way into that position, and now he pastors a church. I fear for the people there. I do. I pray for them on a semi-regular basis because the reality is that I know what that guy was about. He was about him and his own glorification. And the thing about it is that as a result, you have pastors like that. You have people out there like that, where it's all about self-promotion, it's all about self-glorification, and as a result, and they justify their place by saying, well, if God didn't want me here, then I wouldn't be here. God's not the only person working on this planet, man. You got a whole kingdom of enemies over there who are more than happy to build up a fake pastor who's full of pride and ego, and then and then pull the strings that they have attached to that person to use them to puppet their own destruction. Like, that's the thing. Like, you don't think about that. Because they don't want to. So we're having a real talk now. We're having a real conversation about like ministry and so on, and about the importance of God's timing. And here it is. God protects his children. He takes care of his children. Jesus is the good shepherd. He is the one and he is the gate. He is the one who opens the ways for us, right? If you have to weasel your way into something, and I mean, like, the thing about it is success is funny because we view being successful as being good, we make the mistake of justifying horrible behavior. We make the mistake of doing this all the time. And therein lies the problem. Just because God tells you to do something or put something on your heart, if you go and succeed at it, it doesn't necessarily mean it was his will. You can go and succeed at something because of your own drive or your own charisma. You can go and succeed at something because you manipulated people. You can go and succeed at something because you got lucky. And I know, like, there are plenty of believers out there who would say that that's not appropriate or that they don't agree with luck. And it's like, okay, fine. So maybe they didn't get lucky, but maybe somebody favored them enough to grant them the clemency here, and maybe it wasn't God. That's my point. My point here is that when it comes down to your story moving forward, your successes do not equate to being in the will of God. You can be a very successful follower of Jesus and not be following Jesus in any way, shape, or form. Being a counterfeit's easy. What determines whether you are a counterfeit or not is if you are within the will of God. And if you are within the will of God, then you are following him and you are following his timing. And his timing is there for the purpose of maintaining what's best for you. God will tell people, like, to go back to Elijah, for example. Elijah put himself in the position that he was in. You know, Jezebel put out the threat, and he panicked, and he ran out into the wilderness, and he begged God to kill him. And said God took care of him. But he gave him rules about his timing. He kept things within his own timing for what he needed and for what Elijah needed. Because he gave Elijah word to go and give Elisha his mantle. But the thing about it was that before that he had to rest and he had to be attended to by the angels until he was healthy enough to go. Because if God had told him to go immediately, he would have gone immediately. He would have forced himself up and he would have gone and done it, but he didn't. Because he chose to follow God. An example of somebody not following God is Jonah. God had timing there. God was doing work, but Jonah kept going against it. Moses is another one. Moses was all over the place. Moses had instances where God told him to go do things and Moses said, no, I can't. Think about the fact that he had to have Aaron speak for him. God said, I want you to go speak to these people. And Moses was like, no, I can't speak. I'm not a speaker. And God's like, I'm with you. I'm with you here. Well, I still can't talk. Fine. Will it be okay if you have Aaron talk for you? Yeah. So go meet Aaron. He'll be your voice. Or another kind of a weird example was the instance where Zephira, Yeah, a weird one as far as God's timing stuff. There was a point where Moses was supposed to circumcise his kids, and there was an angel that was ready to kill anybody who wasn't circumcised. And Moses' wife saw it. Moses knew what he was supposed to do. He didn't do it. And so when his wife saw what was ahead and saw what was happening, she circumcised their kids and then threw the foreskins at Moses. Like, it's a weird story, but it's there. And the point about it is that sometimes this timing stuff has exceptional value. It is a must. It is a must that it needs to get done, but also at times it is a must that it needs to wait until God says to do it. And the trouble here is that we can't. The thing about it is, and why we keep going back to control and wanting to control it, we want success to be our way of knowing if God's will is being met or not. But it can't. Success can't be the matrix by determining that. It has to be relationship. And it's okay to throw things out there and just be like, okay, God, well, if it's your will for me to go do this thing, and as long as it's coming from a humble place, or as opposed to some kind of like, because divination spirits will get in there and like kind of like interject this idea. I fell for that myself. Like, I used to use a lot of like the example of Gideon. Gideon asked God to give him signs, and asking for signs and prophetic tokens and different things like that, that's fine, but it can become something that the enemy can use against you and can start to use in such a way. If like if divination spirits like Pythos or Kundalini get involved, they can start kind of pushing you that direction by using the signs and tokens against you and misinforming you. But that's a whole other topic. But the thing about it is that sometimes like we can get into this habit and then suddenly we start to idolize that thing. It's like when God called Moses to put that brass serpent up, and then anytime they looked at it or touched it, they'd be healed. The Israelites being bitten by snakes in the desert, they'd be healed. But then when you get over to the time of Hezekiah, the brass serpent is being worshipped. God can give you things, but it doesn't stop it or save it from corruption. But, it's okay to ask for those things on occasion here, but as long as it's moving you towards relationship with God, sometimes you have to do this to understand Him, to kind of like create that basis of knowing. But there is a time where it has to stop, because you eventually move past to a point where your relationship is your relationship. As you develop, as you know God more and know yourself more, there come points in times where these kinds of old things, these kinds of these training wheels have to get broken off. So anyway, the point is that we can't use success as the matrix of determining whether or not we're good, whether or not we're right, whether or not we're following God's will. Because like I said, sometimes God's will be for you to get broken. Sometimes God will take you places with the intent of letting you fail. And the reason being is because sometimes it's not for you to succeed. Sometimes it's not for you, it's not going to be best for you to do that. Sometimes what's going to be best for you is to learn the humility of loss. And that's okay. And that it's okay. Because see, the thing about it is for some of us, I remember a friend, an ex-girlfriend, and she had an issue and she was desperately wanting God to answer her. She wanted him to tell her what to do with her life, and she was just like adamant about it. And she was so frustrated because he wouldn't talk to her. And she's a prophet. So the idea that God wasn't talking to her was even more inflammatory, even more frustrating, because it's just like, what am I doing? What's wrong with me? And he gave me the word to clarify to her that he wasn't telling her because he knew that she would just go and do it. And she wasn't ready. He had a plan, but he knew that if she if she got the orders, if she was told what point C was supposed to look like, she was going to skip B and go straight from A to C before she was ever ready to do it. And she confirmed that that was true, absolutely. But that was the problem. Because God in his infinite wisdom, he knows us. He knows us, and he knows our patterns, and he knows what we need, and he knows what we don't need. And he knows that sometimes people need to lose. Because there are times where we will lose. And, the reality of it is that I'm going to, just to kind of like fill that in a little bit, with 12 years of ministry, and I'm not the only person who has stories like this. I can look at so many different people who have been in this work, and they've seen people say no to God. And that's not something that's in your control. So there are times where there will be people who will come along, and when you are ready for ministry, and when you are there, and when you're doing it, or even now if you're in ministry and you're hearing this, and you're struggling with this, there will come times where there will be people who you care so much for, and you love with all of your heart, and all you have for them is to see them saved. And they will tell God no. And no matter what you say or do, or how hard you pray, they will say no. And they will make that decision in their heart. And you will have to stand there with the ashes in your hands. And that's why sometimes we have to learn how to lose. Because when it comes to dealing with the hearts of men who love darkness, those are Jesus' words in John 3. Sometimes they choose darkness over light. And sometimes we lose. And we have to learn to be okay with that, and to put those people in God's hands and trust him with them. Because he will continue to press on, and he will continue to try to save them. So sometimes the timing is for you to learn to lose. Sometimes the will is for you to learn to lose. And it's not that you were a failure. It's not that you weren't good enough. It's that in God's grand understanding of the time frame that he has for you and everything that he's called you to, he needs you to learn some things. Because God values us learning and developing more than he values our successes, because we learn more sometimes in loss than we do in success. And sometimes we need to learn that we can do everything right and still lose. And that's because we're not the only ones making choices out here. We're not the only show in town. And sometimes we need to learn that. And part of learning that is learning to lose and learning the humility of knowing that we are under God and following him. He's the one who runs the show. He's the king. And it's his kingdom that we're meant to be carrying. We're the heralds. We're the carriers. We're the fighters. We're the this and that, the other thing, but we're not the kings. We're meant to be princes and princesses, and one day we'll reign with him on his throne. And that's all valid, all biblical. But the timing is not for right now. And the reality is that for us to move towards that, we're meant to be coming at it from that perspective. We're all destined to have that. But we need to come into but we need to learn who our king is first. And we need to learn to follow him first. It's why obedience is such a thing that he talks about. Those who love me will obey my teachings, says Jesus. Well, it's not necessarily about the obedience that we oftentimes view it. We look at it like those who have been under fascist governments and so on. But his obedience is simply meaning follow my orders. Just do what I'm telling you to do. I'm going to take care of you. If you know him, you know he loves you. If you know him, you know he's going to take care of you. And that's why we have to address this control thing at such length and so hard, because it's one of the biggest obstacles in us following God's timing. Is one of the biggest obstacles in us knowing his timing. And I'm sorry if, like, for some, you're waiting for me to get to that point where I just, like, discuss God's timing and what it is. But I am. Because it's abstract. And God's timing is in line with his will. And the reality of it is that's how it works. Spoiler. God's will and his timing are completely interlocked with one another. And that's why you have to be able to relinquish control. That's why you have to be able to relinquish everything else. It's because there is a place and a time when God is doing things, when he's taking us places. And that's just the nature of the beast here, is that we have to be able to roll with that and accept that. And if we can't, then we need to be saved from the pride that keeps us from accepting that. Or maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's not even pride. Maybe it's fear that drives you to need to control. Maybe it's an obligate thing that you need to be in control of everything that's happening in life in order to feel safe. But therein we go back to the reality of needing to know that we can trust God, and needing to know in our heart of hearts and in the deepest parts of our brains, even down to our amygdala, that we are safe. We're safe with him. And as long as we stay with him in his will, in his vine, it's John 15, we will be with him. And we will be safe. Because his timing is so deeply interwoven with his will. If God's will for you is to be, the next Billy Graham, as an example, then it's going to be a process of getting you there. And you're probably not ready right now. And that's okay. Because he's going to get you there. If you follow him, he'll take you. You can force it. You can go out and you can start, you can go out and you can learn how to preach a sermon. You can go to Bible college. You can learn all the points. You can learn the formula for how to preach a good sermon. Worship starts off, the formula for worship, they start off going hard and fun and joyful, and then they kind of break down into like the more soulful stuff, and then you, as pastor, you break the tension by coming out with a joke to start things off and kind of like get people to settle down and warm up to you, and then you start sharing your personal anecdote, and then you share the message, and then from there maybe you have worship, maybe you have tithes, maybe your organization on that's different. The point is you can learn all that stuff. There's a whole formula. Then you can go from there and you can learn how to you can watch charismatic teachers like Billy Graham, and you can learn how to speak hype. And then from there, and you can get people riled up and on fire. And then from there you can have a ministry. That doesn't mean that's what God wanted for you. It doesn't mean that you're within his will because you're doing this thing. Maybe this is what you're supposed to do, but maybe you're doing it wrong. And therein lies the problem, is that there's a lot of us make the presumption that, going back to that passive mentality, we make the presumption that we have no control over anything. Some of those ideas, like God's will, God's knowledge, or God, what is a day, 1,000 years, but a day to God? And it's like, well, God knows how days work. Okay, God's not dumb. When Jesus came, how many times did he say, I will raise in 3 days? How many days did it take him to raise from the dead? It took 3. It took 3 days, 3 24-hour cycles around the sun. As it turns out, God is completely capable of understanding and working within worldly time frames. Some people make out like he doesn't know. Some people make out like it's part of the job to understand he doesn't know. No. God's timing is just different. It doesn't always coincide with what we think it should. And on top of that, the other issue is that sometimes the words that we get, we don't understand. We don't understand what he's actually saying. There were plenty of words in Isaiah and Michael that were not exactly what people wanted them to be, as it were. Sorry, just glancing at the Isaiah 53, which is one of the passages here. You know, the thing about it is sometimes we misunderstand the word. God, you might be given a word about how, you know, you're meant to be a teacher, and you take that and say, oh, you know, well, I'm meant to be teach Bible. No, maybe he just meant you were meant to be like a first grade teacher. You know, we just presume understandings. We don't always ask him. Which is an ironic thing, because I mean, there's literally like one of the passages of Isaiah that I was reading here. Isaiah 8:19. When someone tells you to consult mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a person inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? Consult God's instruction and the testimony of warning. If anyone does not speak according to his word, they have no light of dawn. It's a funny thing, because like there's so many instances where we don't ask him. We don't even go to him. We'll ask other people. We'll ask other things. We'll reach out in all these different ways. We don't talk to God, though. You know, God, what's my calling? Well, you'll hear, oh, I'm calling you to this. And you say, oh my gosh, what's that mean? Oh, I should ask people what that means. He already talked to you. Ask him. Ask him what it means. Ask him what to help you understand. Ask him for understanding. Ask him for wisdom. Ask him for knowledge. This is one way to stay in his timing too, because like because so many of us we don't do that. It ends up being this really important thing that we need to do in order to develop relationship and develop a walk with him. Is to be able to ask him questions, to wait to ask him questions, to be inclined to ask him things, to ask for knowledge, to ask for wisdom. It's all right there for you to receive if you will. And he wants you to. Right? Like he wants you to know him. So if his will for you is one way, you know, what's the timing? And it's okay to ask him. Okay, God, when? Just tell me when. Tell me when to go, and I will go. Is it now? No? Okay. What do you want me to do right now? If he says rest, then rest. And that is one of the hard... And I say that as a kind of type A person who has the hardest time resting. I'm not good at it. I never have been. But I've had to learn, because there have been times where he's called me out of ministry. There was actually almost a year period of time before I started this group in its initial version. And, you know, he had me spend like 9 months on the shelf just resting. And oh my gosh, I was going crazy. At first, it felt great, you know, because I was kind of I was very burned out. I was very hurt, very injured by kind of what ministry had become at that point in time. And this was in 2014. And so I was like very, very much a mess inside. And then after a few months of just like listening to him and praying and talking and getting filled, and I'm like, yeah, let's go back. And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, cool. But that's the thing, is God knows best. He knows best what direction to go to. And the thing about it is sometimes when he asks for help, sometimes there will be issues. In Daniel 10, you talk about the Prince of Persia. There are beings out there who are actually trying to create obstacles, and they're trying to stop you from hearing. Sometimes if God chooses to use an angel as a messenger, because he still does that. Like, people read the Bible and they forget. They're just like, oh, God doesn't do that anymore. It's like, no, he absolutely does. Not all of you are as good at hearing the Holy Spirit as you like to pretend. Some of you need an angel sent to you to give you that message. That's part of the nature of things. But sometimes those angels are going to get attacked and delayed. At which point you just wait longer. And maybe that's frustrating, but tough. And that's the thing, is like we always get into these places where we need to be able to recognize his timing. And sometimes we need to be able to recognize his will and to be able to stay in his will. And we need to recognize his timing, because being in his will is on his timing. We get so antsy, we just want things to be done. We just want things to be finished. We want things to be there. It's like the anticipation of it's worse than being told no. And the other thing too is like, with that statement, there are times where we ourselves need to recognize if we're creating the obstacles. Because see, the thing about it is that we are absolutely capable of self-sabotaging. Like, just because God gave you a word, it doesn't make you less able to do that. On the contrary, it actually makes you just as capable, because at that point in time, you can start sandbagging things. I've done this. I'm guilty of this. There have been times where I've not wanted to do things that God told me to do. So I didn't ask him about when I needed to go do it. I didn't, and then until finally somebody said something that convicted me, and I'm like, okay, fine, God, when do you want me to go do this? I want you to go right now. Okay, fine. So it becomes a thing where we absolutely can self-sabotage. We can say no without saying no, because a lot of us, we're afraid to tell God no. I don't want to do this. I referenced Jonah earlier because Jonah had no problem saying no to God. And, we might judge him, but at least he was honest. At least he was cold instead of lukewarm. And that's important. We need to be hot and cold, not lukewarm. We want to say yes, but we don't want to do it, right? And that makes us lukewarm. The truth of the matter is sometimes we need to adopt the reality of okay, fine, I'm just going to tell God the truth, which is, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I absolutely don't. But I also don't want to miss your blessing. I don't want to be outside your will, but I don't want to go do this thing. And then, the fun part about that is if we're actually willing to be open with God about that, he can take the time to address it, to change our hearts, to teach us what we need to learn. Because some of us, we don't want to do things because of anxiety or fear or doubt. Or maybe we're not comfortable with ourselves, or we're not comfortable with him, or maybe we don't trust him. At which point, he will take the time to address those things if we invite him into that. But it means being honest. It means being hot and cold sometimes. And sometimes that's important. Sometimes that's a must. Everyone wants to force the kingdom of God. They want to force themselves to want to follow God. And it's that's not real. I'm sorry. There's a whole thing about choosing God's will that's invaluable. But there's also a whole thing about being honest. I've had plenty of occasions where I've not wanted to do things that God told me to do, and I chose to do them anyways But they were always under the guise of, look, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it because you told me to. And there were times where I was very blessed in that because of that. But there were also times where it was miserable. And I hated it. And I knew I was in the wrong. But it didn't change the fact that, well, it needed to happen. And in truth, I kind of robbed myself of blessing by just not getting to experience the full breadth of God's heart in that instance, because I didn't submit myself to him. And therein we come to the biggest and hardest part of this entire topic: submission. We've already talked about obedience, we've already talked about trust, and now we talk about submission. Because the biggest thing about following God's timing is submitting to God's timing. See, when I was preparing for this, I marked a bunch of places in the scriptures, for various passages in Isaiah, where Isaiah speaks to the birth of Christ. There's Isaiah Isaiah 7:13, or starting in verse 13, where it says, "Then Isaiah said, 'Hear me now, O house, you house of David. Is it not enough for you to try the patience of Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste.'" Another passage is out of Isaiah 9, starting in verse 6, where it says, For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on, and forever the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. See, we're gonna pause on that one for just a moment to kind of talk about it, because it ties into this whole thing of trying to submitting to God's will, right? We can delve into the other scriptures, but the reality is this is where we're landing, and this is where we'll end. Because the thing of all of it is this: when it comes down to it, and we want to follow God's will, we have to also know what God's will is. The Israelites, when they heard when they received these words about government, they presumed that the Messiah was going to put them to free them of their enemies. There are two verses there that stand out. The kings you dread will be laid waste, and the government will be on his shoulders. Well, logically, the government can't be on his shoulders if the government is run by somebody else. Okay? Problem number one. Problem number two, this verse about the kings they dread being laid waste. What does that mean? Now, Isaiah goes on to explain. He talks about Assyria, and he talks about different things relating to that and the kind of the destruction that was bound for that nation. But the thing about it is that sometimes we overlay different things onto other things. So when Jesus came, what was one of the big problems that they had was they wanted him to save them from the Romans, right? See, when it talks about government, the government that Jesus brought was the kingdom of God. And we are all welcomed into that. And as a result, a lot of people at that point in time misunderstood what Jesus was actually bringing to the table. He was bringing something in the spirit. Jesus was bringing a kingdom of God to the people. And that's what he would talk about. He would tell us all the good news. The kingdom of God is near. The kingdom of God is near. For the kingdom of God, it was with him, carried with him. And he carried it and he took it wherever he went. And he brought peace. He brought joy. And there are some who dismiss that whole passage as being like a future statement. It's about when Jesus comes back and rules. And it's like, well, that could be true, but also, if you understand the kingdom of God that he was preaching about and what that is, then you also understand that that's what he's king over. In John 5, Jesus was given all authority. And everything was put underneath him by his Father. And thus it was that he was king. And in that, the government of heaven rests on his shoulders. In that, he now reigns over us. And because we are members, we are children of the kingdom of God. We're children of God and members, princes and princesses of the kingdom. And the thing of it is that as such, we're part of that kingdom. And it is ruled by Jesus. And in that passage is in fact fulfilled. But the Jews at the time didn't appreciate that. They didn't see what was actually happening. They didn't listen to his teachings. They believed in what they had been told for centuries, which was that the Messiah was coming to free them from the Romans, from being captive under other nations, whether it was Babylon or Persia, or Greece, and now Rome. You know, they were chafing under Roman rule and they wanted to be their own nation again. But herein lies the issue, that they superimposed their understanding of things onto Jesus Christ, onto the Messiah as a concept. So when Jesus came, he fulfilled every prophecy that was there. He carried the government on his shoulders because he was the King of heaven. He is the King of heaven. And as a result, he brought people, he was inviting us and adopting us into the kingdom of heaven, into the kingdom of God. When it talks about how he was going to give them the keys to defeat, when he was going to give them the keys to defeat their enemies, he did. He gave us the Holy Spirit so that we could defeat the enemy. The enemy of God is Satan. The enemy of Satan, or the enemy of God and Jesus and the whole kingdom of God is Satan and every demon associated with him. But we didn't understand that. The Jews didn't understand that. So the time frame came and they were expecting Messiah. And when they saw this guy, they didn't understand what he's bringing to the table. So they put him down. And the thing about it is that we do the same thing all the time because we don't know or understand what God's actual will for us is. We don't ask him. We presume to know. We presume to know. And we presume to know when. We presume to know how. We presume to know all these things. And that's not real. That's not what we're called to do. We're called to follow him. We're called to follow him and to follow his will. And as we follow him, he'll guide us through this time frame. sometimes, yeah, you need to ask him, like, is this a thing that I need to do? Because sometimes the time frame is something that's right now. Sometimes there are points where God says do a thing and it's on you to do it. And whether you choose not to do it or whether you choose to do it or not is purely on your hands. Sometimes there are things that God doesn't actually like have a will for, in the sense that it's like it's an allowance. It's the kind of thing where you're just like functioning on your own, and he's like, yeah, you can do that if you want. And then that's on you as well. And any timing on that, that's also on you. And therein lies the thing here, is that we need to become masters of time, in the sense of knowing God well enough, knowing to follow him, knowing to foster a relationship with him, that we can know him and know when he's telling us. We can hear him, and we can know that we're safe to ask him questions. We can know that we're safe to understand him, to receive from him, and we can know that it is his will for us to do this thing or not, and when. And what's more is be humble enough to accept the answer to when. Because that is how it works. Like the thing with God's timing, there's no magic secret. There's no, you have to know, like, you have to understand God's, if you understand God's perception of time, then you're going to understand his ability to manage your time, and you're going to work within his time. That's complete hogwash, okay? It's complete hogwash to presume that you're going to have any control over God's timing, other than doing what he says to do when he says to do it. And that might rub people the wrong way, and that's fine, because your problem at that point is with the control thing here. And that's all. That's all. Because the thing of it is that we're not meant to be ruled by time, but we are ruled by God. So we come underneath him, we follow his direction, and we obey his teachings. We just do what he says to do here. And that's not like a passive thing. It's an active thing that we have to go and we have to learn. We have to know what to do. We have to ask him. We have to develop relationship in that process of getting to know him and getting to understand him. And that's how we stay in his timing. And the thing of it is sometimes, yeah, like we might mess up, and you can ask him for more time. Hezekiah asked him for more time. And the thing of it is sometimes that's not necessarily for the best. Even with that example, when Hezekiah asked for more time, God had just sent one of his prophets to minister to Hezekiah that he was going to die. And then he left, and and when Hezekiah asked, God literally turned the prophet around in the courtyard with a new word. Was like, actually, I'm going to give him more time. He asked for it. Go tell him. But the thing about it is that Hezekiah then proceeded to backslide after he got more time. If he would have died on the time frame that he was given, he would have died the most righteous king, the most righteous man of God, king of Israel of all time, as per the description of him in Kings. But instead, he started to kind of like lose track of things. God knows his timing. He knows what's best. And, sometimes he'll give us what we want anyways. That doesn't mean that we were staying in his will. It doesn't mean that we're blessed in the sense that like we did things perfectly. It just means that he gave us what we wanted, for better or worse. So in this, we need to come to terms with ourselves and our own perception of success. The idea that success and righteousness are intertwined. It's not true. God's will and timing are intertwined with one another. And in order to know that, we have to know God. So there's a call for us as we want to know more about timing. There's a call for us here to know him directly, because you'll start to learn things. You'll see patterns, even patterns in how he talks, how he says things, how he does things. And that's intentional because he wants us to know him. Like I said, it's not even wrong to ask for little signs and tokens on occasion here, because there's a place for us, there's an invitation there for us to get to know him, where he wants us to get to know him, and he wants us to know that we can trust him. And that's an important thing for all of us, to be able to develop that trust with God. It's a must. It's an absolute must. So, and I know that sometimes that can be really bracing, because we want things immediately. Most of us are not patient. And patience is a dirty word, but it's a very, very important word when we're dealing with God. And it's not to say that we need to be patient in the sense that he's like some thing that's going to annoy us or whatever. No. Patience is a fruit of the Holy Spirit that is developed in us and flowers in us because the Holy Spirit exists. And our capacity for patience is not the concern so much as it is a valuable asset of being able to wait on God. And I don't mean wait on God because for everything. Ask him questions. But it is an important value in being able to wait when he says wait. Because he might, and he will. And there will be times when you'll be told to wait. And that's because he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He knew what he was doing with Jesus. He knew what he was doing with Moses. He knew what he was doing with everybody. That isn't to say that everybody followed him perfectly. No one ever does. There may be times when you get caught up in a lie, or the enemy succeeds in causing you to misunderstand or misfire, or maybe you run off into ministry too early before you're ready for it, and you create your own. Suddenly it's suddenly I'm running Nathan Jakar Ministries instead of Refuge. And suddenly, it's about me and my face, and everything's hinging on me. And I love it. I love it because I'm a prideful person. And it's what I've always dreamed of, is to just be out in front ministering. And then I make a mistake and everything crumbles down around me. Because that's how that goes. That's how that goes. That's why timing is a must. This is a very small group. At the moment, I'm sitting with 0 people. Refuge has been small for a while. Ever since COVID. But the thing about it is that I've known, even before COVID, I knew that there was stuff that God needed to work out in my soul before I could move forward into anything more significant. So there were demons that had to be cast off because I didn't even see them. There was pride that needed to be snuffed out. There was humility that needed to be developed. There was wisdom that needed to be given and needed to be received. There was joy that needed to be received more than anything else, needed to be revived, we'll put it that way. And love that needed to be revived. God, I knew, and God knew. And as a result, we this has been a process of just like redeveloping, revivifying me, even, and also building up others in the process. There are people who are meant to be leaders in this group who are currently in their own processes right now, and I know that. I knew that when he first gave me the words about it, about 5 years ago, before we changed the name to Refuge. But it's a thing where we wait and we follow and we pursue God. And that's our active part, to pursue him in the midst of our waiting, in the midst of trying to follow his timing. So, and therein lies the biggest thing about being in line with him and about being in his will, is pursuit. Submit to him, submit to his timing, and pursue him so you know his timing and you know his will. And that's everything that you need to know about God's timing. How to get to know it. There's no magic button or formula. There's just a relationship. There's just knowledge of him and his character and his person and his will. And that's all that you need to know about his timing. I know that maybe for some that will be unfulfilling, but it's also the truth. And if you want a more cerebral approach to timing, you'll find them online. And they might give you some insights, but they won't help you get better at telling it. Anyway, so that's what I've got.